You have felt it, haven't you? That sudden thought that arrives uninvited, that image your mind conjures without your permission, that whisper in your consciousness that disturbs your peace and makes you question the very nature of who you are. You sit in silence, trying to find calm, and there it comes again. A thought so foreign to your true nature that you wonder if you are becoming someone you do not recognize. You push it away with all the strength you possess, and yet it returns, sometimes softer, sometimes louder, always persistent, always there at the edges of your awareness, like a shadow that refuses to leave even in the brightest noon. And in those moments, you have asked yourself the question that haunts so many beautiful souls walking this earth. Why do these thoughts come to me? What have I done to deserve this invasion of my inner sanctuary? Am I broken in some way that others are not? Let me walk with you into the deeper chambers of this mystery, into the places where the soul speaks in languages the mind has forgotten how to understand. The thoughts that disturb you, the images that frighten you, the impulses that shame you, they are not what you have been taught to believe they are. They are not evidence of your darkness. They are not proof of your unworthiness. They are not the voice of some hidden evil waiting to possess you and turn you into someone you fear. No, they are something far more sacred than that. Something that the noise of this world has taught you to misunderstand. Something that your spirit knows even when your mind rejects it with all its might. There is an ancient wisdom that speaks of the soul as a river flowing from the mountains of eternity toward the ocean of understanding. And along this river there gather all the stones of experience, all the branches of memory, all the debris of a lifetime lived in a world that does not always make space for the fullness of human feeling. Some of these stones are smooth, worn gentle by the current of time and acceptance, but others remain sharp, jagged, unprocessed, waiting in the depths for the moment when the river slows enough for them to rise to the surface. Your intrusive thoughts are these unsmooth stones. They are the parts of your experience that have not yet been held, have not yet been seen, have not yet been allowed to speak their truth in the light of your compassionate awareness. And understand this, the river does not choose which stones it carries. It receives them all, the beautiful and the broken, the welcomed and the feared. The river does not judge its contents. It simply flows. And in flowing, it offers each stone the possibility of transformation. But transformation requires time. It requires the patience of water moving over rough edges, decade after decade, century after century. Your mind expects instant smoothing, instant peace, instant resolution, but the soul works in rhythms older than urgency, deeper than demand. The thoughts that disturb you have been forming for years, shaped by experiences you may not even remember, by words spoken to you when you were too young to defend yourself, by moments of fear that imprinted themselves on your consciousness before you had language to name them, and now they rise to the surface, not to torment you, but because the river of your awareness has finally slowed enough, has finally become still enough for these stones to show themselves and ask for the healing touch of your attention. You see, the mind is not a fortress meant to keep certain thoughts out and certain thoughts in. The mind is a garden, and in every garden there are seeds carried by winds you did not summon, planted by seasons you did not choose. Some of these seeds grow into flowers you welcome, others grow into weeds you wish to destroy. But here is what the world has not taught you, what the voices of fear and control have hidden from you, what your own spirit has been trying to whisper to you through the very thoughts you resist. The weeds are not your enemies, they are your teachers, and they grow precisely in the soil that needs the most attention, the most care, the most light. Every gardener knows that where weeds grow thickest, there the soil is richest. There the conditions for growth are most potent. The weed does not grow in barren ground. It grows where life is possible, where something is trying to emerge. Your intrusive thoughts are the weeds pointing to the fertile soil of your unprocessed experience, your unexpressed emotion, your unlived life. They grow in the places where you have buried things too painful to feel, too shameful to acknowledge, too overwhelming to integrate. And yes, they are unwelcome. Yes, they disturb the aesthetic you wish to maintain, but they are not random, they are not meaningless. They are the psyche's way of saying, here, look here, there is something beneath this ground that needs your attention, something that will not stay buried forever, something that grows more insistent the longer you refuse to see it. When a thought arrives that horrifies you, when an image appears that contradicts everything you believe about yourself, when an impulse surfaces that makes you recoil in shame, your first instinct is to fight. You clench your fists around your consciousness and try to strangle the thought before it can take root. You distract yourself with noise, with work, with anything that will drown out the whisper. You pray for it to leave. You bargain with yourself, promising to be better, to be purer, to be more controlled if only this invasion will cease. And in that moment of fighting, in that instant of resistance, you miss the message that the thought has come to deliver. Your intrusive thoughts are not invaders. They are ambassadors from the territories of your soul that have been exiled, the parts of yourself that you were taught to banish, the aspects of your humanity that the world insisted were unacceptable. When you were young, the world gave you a map of who you were allowed to be. It drew clear borders around acceptable thoughts, appropriate feelings, permissible desires, and everything that fell outside those borders, you learned to disown. You learned to say, that is not me, even when it was. You learned to push away even when the pushing created a pressure that could never fully dissipate. And so these disowned parts of you, these exiled fragments of your wholeness, they learned to speak in the only language available to them, the language of intrusive thoughts, sudden and shocking, demanding to be noticed because gentle whispers had been ignored for far too long. Think of a child trying to get the attention of a parent lost in distraction. First, the child speaks softly, then a little louder. Then the child might do something dramatic, something that cannot be ignored. Your psyche works the same way. The parts of you that carry fear, that carry anger, that carry desires, you have deemed shameful, that carry the shadow of experiences you have not fully processed, they try first to speak gently. But when you spend years pushing them away, denying their existence, treating them as enemies, they have no choice but to speak louder. And the louder they speak, the more you resist. And the more you resist, the louder they must become to break through your defenses. This is not a battle you are losing. This is a conversation you have not yet learned to have. The soul does not speak in straight lines and logical sequences. The soul speaks in symbols, in sensations, in sudden eruptions of knowing that bypass the reasoning mind entirely. When a thought comes to you that feels wrong, ask yourself not, why am I having this thought? But what is this thought trying to show me about what I have not yet made peace with? Perhaps the thought of harming someone you love arrives not because you wish to harm them, but because you carry unprocessed anger or fear about vulnerability that has nowhere else to go. Perhaps the thought of doing something shameful visits you not because you desire to do it, but because you carry judgments about shame itself that need to be examined, need to be brought into the light where they can finally dissolve. There's a difference between a thought and an intention. There is a difference between an image in your mind and a desire in your heart. There's a difference between what visits your consciousness and what you choose to do with your hands, your words, your life. The world has collapsed these distinctions, has taught you that to think something is the same as to want it, that to imagine something is the same as to plan it. And in this collapse, you have lost the ability to be a witness to your own mind, to observe without identifying, to notice without becoming. Listen closely to this truth, for it may be the most liberating thing you hear today. A thought is not a commitment. An image is not a prophecy. An impulse is not a command. They're simply movements in consciousness, waves on the ocean of your awareness, clouds passing through the vast sky of your being. When you see a cloud shaped like a dragon, you do not believe a dragon exists. You understand that water vapor has taken a temporary form that resembles something else. Your thoughts work the same way. They take shapes, they form patterns, they create images that may resemble terrible things, but they are not those things. They are temporary formations in the ever-shifting landscape of your mind, and they have no more power over your actions than a cloud has power over the sky through which it passes. You are not your thoughts. You are the vast awareness in which thoughts arise and fall like waves upon an infinite ocean. You are the sky through which clouds pass, not the clouds themselves. You are the canvas upon which images are painted, not the images. And when you understand this, when you truly feel this distinction in your bones, the nature of intrusive thoughts transforms completely. They lose their power to define you. They lose their ability to convince you that you are secretly terrible. They become what they always were, passing weather in the climate of your consciousness, temporary visitors in the eternal home of your being. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. The mind can know something while the heart still fears it. The real transformation comes when you learn to turn toward your intrusive thoughts with curiosity instead of horror, with compassion instead of condemnation, with the gentle curiosity of a gardener examining what has grown in the night. When a disturbing thought arrives, instead of pushing it away, you might say to it, "Hello, I see you. What have you come to teach me? What part of myself are you trying to show me? What pain are you trying to protect me from?" This is not welcoming the thought as truth. This is welcoming the thought as messenger. And here, in this turning toward instead of away, in this meeting instead of fleeing, something miraculous begins to happen. The thought that seemed so powerful, so dangerous, so overwhelming, it begins to soften. It begins to reveal itself not as a monster, but as a frightened child, not as an enemy, but as a part of yourself that has been crying out for attention, for acceptance, for love. The more you meet these thoughts with compassion, the less they need to shout. The more you make space for them to be seen without judgment, the less they need to intrude with force. They become quieter not because you have conquered them, but because you have finally listened. This is the great paradox that the sages have always known, the secret that hides in plain sight. You cannot control your mind by controlling your mind. You cannot force peace by waging war on your own thoughts. You cannot become whole by rejecting the parts of yourself that disturb you. The path to inner quiet is not through domination, but through integration. It is not through denial, but through acceptance. It is not through fighting, but through understanding that there is nothing in your consciousness that is not worthy of compassion, nothing that is not part of the complex, beautiful, sometimes contradictory experience of being human. You might be wondering, what if my thoughts are truly terrible? What if they reveal something dark and dangerous in me that needs to be suppressed? And here I must tell you something that may challenge everything you have been taught. The presence of a thought does not make you dangerous. The suppression of that thought does. A thought acknowledged, examined, and understood loses its power to control you. A thought denied, resisted, and feared grows stronger in the dark. The person who never has a violent thought is not more peaceful than the person who has such thoughts and meets them with consciousness. The person who claims to have only pure thoughts is not more evolved than the person who acknowledges the full spectrum of human ideation. The difference is not in what thoughts arise, but in what relationship you have with those thoughts, whether you allow them to pass through your awareness like birds through the sky, or whether you build cages around them and spend your life as their prisoner. There are souls who walk this earth convinced that their intrusive thoughts make them uniquely broken, uniquely dangerous, uniquely unworthy of love and belonging. They carry this secret shame like a weight around their necks, believing they must hide this part of themselves from everyone, even from themselves. And yet, if you could open the minds of every person you pass on the street, if you could see the thoughts that visit them in their quiet moments, you would discover that intrusive thoughts are not a sign of individual brokenness, but a common feature of human consciousness. You would see that the person who seems most serene has thoughts that disturb them. You would see that the person who appears most controlled has impulses they fear. You would see that you are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. And the shame you carry is based on a lie that the world tells about what normal human consciousness looks like. The mind generates thousands of thoughts each day, most of them random, many of them meaningless, some of them disturbing. This is not a flaw in your design. This is how consciousness works when it is alive, when it is creative, when it is free to explore the full range of human possibility without censorship. The creative mind that can imagine beautiful poetry can also imagine terrible violence. The compassionate mind that feels deep empathy can also generate thoughts of harm. This is not contradiction. This is wholeness. This is the price of consciousness itself, the ability to conceive of what you would never choose, to imagine what you would never become, to think what you would never do. And so the question is not how to stop intrusive thoughts, because that is not a question that leads anywhere except deeper into suffering. The question is how to change your relationship with these thoughts, how to create enough inner space that you can observe them without becoming them, notice them without believing them, acknowledge them without acting on them. This space is not created through force. It is created through practice, through patience, through the slow and gentle work of learning to be with yourself exactly as you are, including the parts that frighten you, including the thoughts that disturb you, including the inner experiences that do not match the image you wish to project to the world. You begin by noticing when a thought arrives that triggers your alarm. You notice the thought, and then you notice your reaction to the thought. You observe how your body tenses, how your breath becomes shallow, how your mind immediately begins to argue with the thought, to explain it away, to construct elaborate defenses against it. And in this observation, you create a tiny bit of distance between you and the thought. You realize that you are the one noticing, not the thought itself. You are the awareness that contains the thought, not the thought that defines your awareness. This noticing is itself a sacred act. It is the moment when you step back from the drama of your mind and remember that you are not the actor on the stage, but the stage itself, the space in which all dramas unfold and dissolve. When you notice that you are noticing, when you become aware of your own awareness, something shifts in the fundamental structure of your experience. The thought is still there, but you are no longer trapped inside it. You have created a breath of space, a moment of freedom, a small clearing in the forest of your consciousness where you can rest and observe without being consumed. Then you practice not running. When the thought comes and every instinct screams at you to distract yourself, to escape, to do anything but stay present with the discomfort, you practice staying. Not dwelling, not analyzing, not feeding the thought with attention and energy, but simply allowing it to be there without making it mean something catastrophic about who you are. You practice the simple statement, I am having the thought that, and you complete that sentence with whatever disturbing content has arrived. I am having the thought that I might lose control. I am having the thought that I could hurt someone. I am having the thought that something terrible will happen. This small act of language creates distance, reminds you that you are not the thought, you are the one having the thought, and there is a universe of difference between those two realities. Over time, with this practice, something shifts. The thoughts do not necessarily disappear, though sometimes they do, fading away once they realize they no longer have the power to terrify you, no longer serve as effective messengers because you have finally heard their message. But whether they come less frequently or not, they lose their charge. They become like any other thought, noticed and released, observed and allowed to pass. You discover that you can have a disturbing thought and go about your day. You can notice an intrusive image and still feel peace. You can acknowledge an unwanted impulse and know with certainty that you will never act on it. This is not about becoming cold or disconnected from your inner life. This is about becoming so connected, so intimate with the full landscape of your consciousness that nothing surprises you anymore, nothing shocks you, nothing has the power to convince you that you are other than who you know yourself to be. You become like the mountain that does not flinch when storms gather at its peak, knowing that storms are temporary, that they do not change the fundamental nature of stone and earth, that the clear sky always returns even if it seems impossible in the moment of thunder. And as you practice this relationship with your thoughts, as you learn to meet them with curiosity instead of condemnation, something even more profound happens. You begin to understand that your intrusive thoughts have always been trying to protect you, have always been attempting to prepare you for dangers they perceive,
have always been the mind's awkward way of trying to keep you safe in a world that can be unpredictable and sometimes threatening. The thought of harming your child comes not from a desire to harm, but from a deep fear of loss, from a psyche trying to prepare you for the worst so that you will be vigilant, so that you will protect what is precious. The thought of doing something shameful comes not from a wish to shame yourself, but from old beliefs about unworthiness that need to be examined and released. Every intrusive thought, when you look beneath its surface, is trying in its clumsy way to serve you, to alert you, to help you survive in a world where not all threats are visible. When you see your thoughts this way, when you recognize them as misguided protectors rather than malevolent forces, something softens in you. You no longer have to be at war with your own mind. You no longer have to spend your energy suppressing and controlling and fighting what arises naturally. You can say to these thoughts, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I am safe, I am aware, I do not need this particular alarm anymore." And over time, the alarm quiets, not because you have forced it into silence, but because it has received the acknowledgement it needed, because it has been heard, because it has finally been allowed to rest. There are many who will tell you that intrusive thoughts are a problem to be solved, a symptom to be medicated, a disorder to be treated. And yes, for some, professional support is valuable and necessary, especially when thoughts become so overwhelming that they interfere with the ability to live. But underneath all the clinical language, underneath all the diagnoses and treatment plans, there remains this fundamental truth. Your thoughts are part of you. They arise from the same consciousness that creates love and beauty and meaning. And they deserve to be met with the same compassion you would offer to any part of yourself that is suffering, that is trying to be heard, that is seeking integration into the wholeness of who you are. You are not broken because you have intrusive thoughts. You are conscious. You are alive. You are a being with a mind capable of generating infinite possibilities. And sometimes that mind generates possibilities you do not want, do not choose, do not align with. This is not a flaw. This is a feature of the miraculous complexity of human consciousness. The same mind that can write symphonies can compose discordant notes. The same mind that can paint masterpieces can sketch nightmares. The same mind that can love deeply can imagine loss completely. This is what it means to have a mind that is free, that is creative, that is not limited by fixed boundaries of what it is allowed to conceive. So walk forward now with this understanding settling into your bones like rain into thirsty earth. When the next intrusive thought arrives, and it will arrive because you are human and alive and conscious, meet it differently. Do not run from it. Do not hate yourself for it. Do not let it convince you that you are secretly terrible or dangerous or unworthy. Simply notice it. Acknowledge it. Let it pass through the vast sky of your awareness like a cloud that came and will go. Say to yourself, there is that thought again. There is that image. There is that impulse. And it does not define me. It does not control me. It is simply a temporary visitor in the infinite space of my being. You are so much larger than any thought that passes through you. You are so much more than the storm of your mind. You contain multitudes, and some of those multitudes will disturb you, will frighten you, will make you question yourself. Let them. Question yourself and then answer with compassion. Let yourself be disturbed and then return to the knowing that you are safe, you are whole, you are exactly as you should be in this moment, intrusive thoughts and all. The path forward is not the elimination of unwanted thoughts, but the expansion of your capacity to hold all thoughts without being consumed by any of them. It is not about achieving a mind that is pure and controlled, but about developing a heart that is spacious enough to embrace the full truth of what it means to be human, messy, and contradictory, and sometimes frightening, but always, always worthy of love. And when you walk this path, when you practice this compassionate witnessing of your own mind, you discover that the very thoughts that once held you prisoner become doorways to deeper self-understanding, to greater freedom, to a peace that does not depend on having perfect thoughts, but on having perfect
acceptance of your imperfect humanity. The thoughts that frightened you become teachers. The images that disturbed you become mirrors, showing you what still needs your love. The impulses that shamed you become invitations to examine the judgments you carry about yourself and others. This is the gift hidden inside the curse. This is the wisdom waiting in the shadow. This is the awakening that comes not from transcending your humanity, but from finally, fully, courageously embracing it, including the parts that do not fit into neat categories of acceptable and unacceptable, good and bad, pure and impure. You are all of it. You are the entire spectrum of human consciousness, and your intrusive thoughts are simply proof that you have not amputated any part of yourself, have not cut off access to any corner of human experience, have not narrowed your consciousness into something small and manageable and safe. Stand in the fullness of who you are. Let the thoughts come, let them go. Be the witness, be the compassion, be the space in which everything is allowed to be, to arise, to pass away. This is not weakness. This is the strongest thing you will ever do. This radical acceptance of your own mind exactly as it is, this refusal to wage war against yourself, this commitment to meeting every part of yourself with kindness, even when that part disturbs you deeply. The dawn comes not because the night was wrong. It comes because both night and day are necessary. Both shadow and light are real. Both terror and peace are part of the great turning of consciousness toward wholeness. Your intrusive thoughts are part of your night, and you do not need to fear the night anymore. You can walk through it knowing that morning comes, that you carry your own light, that nothing you think can ever extinguish who you truly are. If this spoke to your spirit, write in the comments, "I am awakening now."